Hey guys and girls, Board now back with you. On this video I'm going to be talking about Alien Earth Season 1 Episode 3. It is called Metamorphosis. Full spoilers from the start of this review as always. And I don't know, it's a bit hard to know how to feel about this one because once again, I was getting some of the frustrations that I was getting from the other two episodes, like some of the problems they have with some of the over quirkiness and some cheesy lines of dialogue. The characters not really grabbing me on the whole. Like, there's definitely characters that I am into a bit more, Wendy being the main one. Although she's not really in this episode as much because she is a bit more sidelined because of plot reasons. But yeah, it's funny. Like, I don't know if necessarily this was a weaker episode compared with the first two, or whether it's just because it's now the third episode and it's starting to build up a bit. Then okay, this show still has problems and there's only 8 episodes in this season. There may well be a season 2. We're not quite sure yet. But they seem to be setting up quite a bit of world building so far. And there are things where you could definitely see them doing a season 2. There seems to be enough here. And to be fair, that might be something that might improve the show. Like, maybe it'll find its feet a little more in season 2. Maybe they'll iron out some of these issues, but based on the first 3 episodes, it does kind of feel that things are getting a little bit repetitive with the story and the characters, and I don't know, it just sort of feels that there will always be good things in the show. Because I think the horror moments are well done in the series, for example. But then I think there's a bit of an issue with the alien stuff being overused in the way it is. And I can see why it is, but that is a little bit of a problem. So it could be this thing of what I'm seeing isn't actually that bad. It's just they're not really fixing the problems and it's just getting a little bit repetitive. But I think what I would say is this episode definitely sets up some interesting things, and it's just a case of if it now follows through on them, because it's a little bit less action packed this episode. Most of it is set back at like the lab because Wendy finds Joe alive early in the episode. He's been wounded, like he's trapped by some sort of cocoon or like a cocoon like type substance, and you get this big battle between Wendy and like the Xenomorph where she's like using a hook, and it's quite an exciting set piece. Again, that's definitely something they've got right in the show so far. I feel there's been some good action and some good direction in those scenes, because at one point it chases her towards an elevator shaft and she kind of like dives in and ultimately she kills it. I can't remember if it's in the elevator or like when she gets down, but she does kill it, but that it takes it out of her. She gets wounded, she gets drained, and she passes out. So the helicopters come in to clean the scene basically, and they found all this different alien stuff, and they found like alien eggs and things like that. So Boy obviously wants them to bring it back for research. And I think this is where the episode feels like it's at its best, because I think just seeing some of like the alien egg, for example, and then some of like the parasites and the different things that are going on when they start researching it and experimenting. All that looks really good because it is practical, and it's those ideas where they are like starting to expand a little bit, and there are promising things about it. But yeah, I maybe appreciated that this episode wasn't as frantic as episodes 1 and 2, and it was a little bit more low key. And as I said, if it pays off some of the ideas it sets up, then that'll be a good thing. But it remains to be seen, and obviously there are still problems that I'm having. So again, it's quite a frustrating episode. So as I said, Wendy has been injured, potentially could be dying. So they bring her back, they bring all the research back, what they found. I'll get back to Marlowe in a moment, because like his stuff sort of fits at the end. But the one thing with him is that he bumps into Slightly, and it turns out they know each other from the past. And Slightly's kind of jealous because Marlowe got to go on this mission, he didn't, and Marlowe's telling him about all his experiences with the creatures and stuff like that. But once again, this scene is a good example of what's wrong with the show at times, because when these two first bump into each other, they're going crazy with like calling each other bro or dude, and okay, I get it, they're friends and they haven't seen each other for a while, but it was just so obnoxious how many times they were saying like either bro or dude, and it just took me out of the scene really. And then there's this whole thing because Slightly's with another one of the Lost Boys, and so you've got a pretty cool visual, I think, of Marlowe like basically recharging himself. So he's got these electrolytes going into him, and it's like recharging a battery. But then there's this whole thing where he knows he's in danger because Boyd's side obviously want him, so he has to try and escape, and things get a little bit tense. But before he does escape, he plants like a bug on Slightly so that he has a contact from the inside. And that is one of the episode's promising ideas that it sets up, which I'll return to later. The only other thing with Marlowe before the end is that he does talk to one of the founders, like I can't remember which one it was, but one of the Shatani, I think it was, but he talks to her on the phone, and she wants him to come in because he says what happened and he's wounded, that kind of thing. But he refuses to come in because he says this is my baby. Because he tells her what happens, and the eggs have been taken and all the rest of it. But he says, no, this is my baby, I'm gonna fix it, and says I can get them back. And that's what he does against her wishes. So that's a thing where he's going a bit off book. And another thing is when they're coming back to the lab by helicopter, they do like an Apocalypse Now type thing, like a rock song, similar to how we have that. And because they're in helicopters and they're in like, some of them are like in military type get up, it looks very Apocalypse Now. And once again, I think that was a bit of overcooked thing, that scene, because it feels like, yeah, okay, this is a bit much, this is a little bit jarring. Because some of the musical stuff in the shows I've quite liked, because this episode ends with quite a choice Metallica track, which I think is a good way to play out. But that scene, the Apocalypse Now scene, I'll call it, was quite jarring, unfortunately. So they get back to the lab, and once again, Dame Sylvia is the character's name I was trying to think of before. Like, she's just really distraught. Like, she feels very guilty about them sending Wendy out there. Like, once again saying she wasn't ready, it's my fault. If she dies, it's my fault. So once again, we're seeing like she does have a conscience when it comes to this thing, whereas Boy is being his usual sort of cold self. But I mean, what's interesting is that Boy wants Hirsch to get to work with this new stuff like the alien egg and all that they found, and we see how shallow he is and how heartless he is, because he really doesn't seem to care if Wendy dies or not. He's like willing to disregard her because they've got this new stuff and he wants to explore it more. And yeah, that's kind of it. Like he legitimately doesn't seem to care one way or the other if she lives or dies. And even Hirsch questions him a bit in the episode, because when he's talking about, okay, I want you to start experimenting on this stuff, Hirsch points out that, well, what about the Wendy experiment? We've put like 10 years into this. Is it worth disregarding it just for all this other stuff that might not necessarily work out? But he can't be reasoned with. He wants them to go ahead. And I think one of the most interesting ideas of the episode when it comes to Boy, and I absolutely hate this character, as I've said, like he doesn't really impress me at all, but one of the things that seems to ring true with him, and him now disregarding Wendy, because it seems like, I mean, obviously if she wasn't on death's door and she wasn't potentially going to die, and then it might be a bit different, but he doesn't really want to deal with the situation of, okay, I'm worried here that she's going to die. He doesn't want to deal with all that. As I said, from his point of view, if she pulls through, great, but if not, we move on to the next project. Then this comes into play later on, and one of the things they do in the episode, which I think is quite good, at least potentially, is we start to see some of the lost children question things when it comes to Wendy, about why she is given like the special treatment, about why she was the only one who got to pick her name. So this character, is it Not something like that anyway, the red haired girl, and that actress, it popped up in quite a bit actually. She was in a really good indie film that came out a few years ago, Pincushion, which I really recommend. She's also in Sex Education, the Netflix series, so has a pretty solid CV. Like, she's very familiar. But in the opening scene to this, she's the one, as I said, questioning about why did Wendy get to change her name when we didn't, or get to pick her own name, and starting to question, why does she get special treatment? And she's asking this to Carly, and it's Carly who later on goes in to see Boy, and is trying to position herself to take over from Wendy as like being the leader of this group, because she says to Boy then Wendy is selfish, pretty much. She says she only cares about her stupid brother, and that's it. Whereas I wouldn't be like that. I would be focused on the mission, and I would be the best I can be, like the best you've seen, and she's really putting herself out there and is trying to become his favourite, as she says later. So this is why this stuff works quite well, because you have him, as I said, Wendy was the hot item for a while, his big project, and now that things have gone on the wayside and he's found this new stuff, this alien egg, he's really excited to get started on that. And he seems to not really care about the Wendy stuff anymore. So what we're seeing is like how competitive that sort of character can be, and how it's all about he's impressed by competition. Like that's a very sort of like rich guy capitalist sort of thing where he thrives on it, and he thrives on making everyone around him jump through hoops and try and impress him, because that's what Carly is doing in this scene. And she says, am I your favourite now? He says no, but he gives us some research, he gives us some books, and he makes it. She gets involved in the project. Like by the end, when Hirsch and the rest are like experimenting on these eggs and things, she's filming it. So she started to take more of a role, and Boy says, have a look at these books and you're in the race. You could become my favourite. So again, he's enjoying that stuff, and we'll see where it leads, because I never really thought that Wendy was dead, because it does seem like she's the main character of the show, and that would be a bit anticlimactic, especially in episode 3. And I was definitely relieved that she wasn't dead, because she's easily the best character so far. So, I mean, what happens later on is that she awakes in the middle of the night, and she goes to Joe, but Joe is still out of it also, like he's still having treatment. So it's when things are really building up, where they've been experimenting with these eggs. There's also like a parasite at one point which gets tossed into a tank, and we start to see things hatching. And as all this is going down, Wendy starts having spasms and starts reacting to this in a negative way, and almost passes out. She falls on the ground, she's shaking, all this. So she's having bad reactions to what's happening in the lab. And so that's intriguing as well, I will say, because I'm not quite sure why she's having those reactions. I don't know if maybe she's got alien DNA inside her, and there's something about this which is like setting that stuff off. But it was quite an interesting way to end the episode, and I did think, as I said, the stuff in the lab was well done because of all the practical effects and how satisfying it all looked and how kind of old school. So, yeah, pretty solid stuff. Like I said, it's setting up some good ideas. I think the problem with the Lost Children stuff is, as I said, slightly I do find an annoying character, and unfortunately it looks like we're going to get more of him, which isn't great news because I think the actor isn't that good, and I think I just find the character too annoying as well. Like, he's one of these that we're getting in this show where he's a little bit too quirky and a little bit too full on. And I think the problem with the Lost Boys plot is, I think it's just this idea that less is more with this stuff. Like, I think with Wendy leading them and her being the focus, that's better, at least for now, because it's something tangible and we're quite invested in her. But I don't know. I think it could get quite annoying depending on how good some of these characters are, and it could just sort of overwhelm like the main plot. And yeah, there is something where it's a little bit hit and miss. Like, I don't love the idea of getting to know all these different like Lost Boys characters, because yeah, some of them I think just because of them being quite childlike and what have you, I think could be quite annoying. So Slightly being a good example of that. So another thing is Slightly and one of the other Lost Boys, the other guy who was with him on the scene, they get questioned by the bodyguard, by the Edmondson character. And this doesn't really come to much. Like, the main thing he wanted to know was what Mallow said to him, what he whispered to, because like they've got the images but there's no sound, and he could see that Mallow whispered something to him, and he tells him, like Slightly says, he said, well, when is a robot not a robot? And that's part of the point of that scene, is that Mallow was starting to plant some seeds of doubt about their existence and who they are, and this idea of you're under control pretty much, that you're doing what they want you to do, whereas Mallow sees himself as being more independent and in control of his own destiny, even though he is also like a cyborg. So that's something he's starting to tap away at. And then later on, it's the second from last scene. The Wendy stuff ends the episode, but Mallow does contact Slightly, and he's contacting him to have a contact from the inside, and like he talks him into being his friend, even though Slightly is reluctant. But once again, this scene is a frustrating scene because in theory I quite like it, but I also find it very jarring and cheesy, and they have to add a cheesy bit of dialogue that you just don't need in the scene, because when he says, okay, can you be my friend, and Slightly agrees, Mallow then signs off by saying, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs by, and he's smiling. But I mean, what a crappy line. I mean, why give that sort of line? I think it would be a bad line anyway, but why give it to someone like Mallow? I mean, I can see what they're doing, but they're not being very subtle with it. They're kind of like smashing you over the head with it. So I quite like the promise of some of the Mallow stuff, especially. I mean, unfortunately, it's with Slightly, who I think is one of the weakest characters for sure. And to be honest, the characters aren't fantastic in this show. Like, Wendy's definitely the standout. There's a couple of others who I think are decent. I think because Timothy Othwaite is playing Hirsch, that gives him a little bit of an edge, because I think Timothy Othwaite plays weirdos quite well and has a decent presence to him. The character itself, I'm not sure is really that interesting, but definitely Timothy Othwaite brings a bit more to him. So, yeah, I think it's a case of wait and see from this episode forth, because there's definitely some good things set up. It's just a bit concerning that some of the problems that was in the first two episodes are still here, and like still drags it down a little bit. But we'll really see. The next couple of episodes, I think, will go a long way into like deciding how strong the season is going to be overall. But that's my thoughts on Alien Earth episode 3. Let me know what you guys thought of it in the comments below. Like and subscribe as always. Share me out. You can also support me on patreon.com/borednow, or you can sign up for a channel membership. I will link that in the description. If you want to make a one-off donation, you can on PayPal, or you can hit me up on the super chat. Just hit the super chat button and you can make a donation that way. If not, then that's fine. Just if you want to help out, liking this video will do the same. And you can also, as I said, subscribe to the channel if you are new and help cheer me out. But thanks for listening, guys. Keep watching TV, and I'll see you next time.